And hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine Coach at Home. My name's Nick. I'm the sommelier at Peter Pan Bistro. And I'm here to talk about Piedmont, and I'm talking about Vietti, and have give you a good, overview, have some fun. But I can't do it alone. So this time, I got a good friend of mine, someone I deeply respect in terms of Italian wine, Tony Weber. She is here with us today. Hello, Tony. How are you today?
Very well. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, we did this for people who don't realize. We also did this session last week, yesterday, last week. I don't have that
Good
time.
time.
We did this yesterday, so we're excited to taste these ones again, and just sort of, I don't know, for us have a different experience. We didn't get our wines in pouches. We kept the wines in the bottle. So for us, the wine will have evolved much more than you would have experienced. But I hope you're all excited and ready to taste. Obviously, as always, Rachel, our secret somm, is in the chat, ready to talk and ready to answer any questions you have in the chat. So feel free to shout out, say hello to everyone else in the chat. We are looking at it. We just may not be able to engage with it, but we're going to have some fun. And contrary to popular belief, Piedmont is fun, and the wines should feel fun, and you should feel excited and happy to explore it. It can feel intimidating, but honestly, I think there's a lot of great wines out there, and this lineup is really indicative of that fact. So I hope we can have, have a really cool tasting, and everyone can, get a little bit of a snapshot into, Vietti and Piedmont.
Yeah.
Tony,
Yes.
talk to me about Vietti. What was your? I mean, these are iconic wines within the region. Like,
100%. Yeah, I'd say total
and
benchmark.
they're labels, but the way that they just sort of comport themselves, and I think is really fun. And there's a reason why I chose to single out Vietti as a snapshot. But I'd love to know, like, what's your history with Vietti, and like, why do you love these wines so much?
Okay, great. I mean, I think I'm trying to think of the first time that I tasted them. I think it was before I knew anything about wine. I think Yeti has had a strong presence in our market for quite some time. But I think when I started to really get into working with them and working with the lineup extensively would have been when I started working at Aloe, when we opened in, I think it was 2014 or 2015. I can't remember now. But that's when I started to have the opportunity to taste through the wines and pair with them and work with them on a regular basis. The consistency and the quality, the value prospect that these wines represent has always been really, really high up there and always impressed me. So once I started working with Bricks and Mortar, which is the agency that imports the wines, I was excited to have the chance to kind of tell the story to a wider group of people, and try to get the wines out there as much as possible.
I like there's always this element of surprise with Vietti. Like when I discovered the Arnase, which the first wine we're tasting, and then the Timorasso, and then the Fraser, and at every step along my sort of journey into Piedmont, Vietti was kind of always there to like push me to that next level, and I've always, I guess, respected the brand for that, because it has been something that like I can always rely on as a wine, and this isn't a promotional tool for Vietti. The goal of these sessions is always to just like give you the confidence to navigate a region that you might, or a grape varietal that you may not feel confident with, and perhaps give you some, just
Yeah,
curiosity, and not feel so like intimidated.
exactly. Which I think is so amazing that you're doing this for this region and for this lineup of wines, but that you do this every week. sometimes several times a week or several times a day, as you're doing a sake tasting after this one.
Yeah. See,
Um,
no
I think
secret here. I'm doing a sake
service
tasting after this.
that you're
Yeah.
doing for our community, and we're all locked away, and I think we all miss this kind of engagement so much. And you've found really ingenious and creative ways to engage us all. So thank you, Nick, for that.
Thank you so much.
I think, you touched on a couple things that are definitely worth noting about the winery in terms of their own ingenuity and the way that they've always kind of pushed forward, and they're still doing that to this day. I guess I should give a little bit of a background on the winery, just some kind of Coles Notes history,
Please,
so
absolutely.
everybody understands where they fall in the context of Barolo in general and the region of Piemonte in general. So we're talking about a fourth generation winery. 1919 is when they first started estate bottling their wines. That was Mario Vietti. Their cellar, however, dates back to the 17th century. It is very, very deep, very, very cold, kind of ideal conditions for making wine, and kind of a rarity in the region, to still have and be working with cellar that is dates back that far and is still in full functioning order. The current winemaker is Luca Corrado, and he and his wife Elena run the winery, represent the wines. Elena travels extensively. She visits our market when she can, almost every year, sometimes more than once a year, and we always really look forward to her visits. And sometimes we're lucky enough to get Luca as well, who's a very, very charming party animal for such
I remember meeting them.
Impressive winemaker.
Yeah, 2019 at Vin Italy, and just like in an environment where there's hundreds of thousands of people, their ability to like make you feel like invited into their space,
Yeah.
and like that you're not just another sort of cog, or like you're another like one of thousands of people who want to talk to them.
Yeah.
And that their passion for their wine like translated into that was like such a breath of fresh air in if so for people who don't know, Vin Italy is this large wine fair that happens in Verona once a year. Well, it did. It will perhaps again, but it's like every a lot every major producer has a stall there, and we're talking about fest, like a wine fair the size of like 13 city blocks, and it's just full of people and full of wine.
Yeah. Super overwhelming
it's
for most
very
people.
overwhelming to be there, but to just like have your little space of like this fair and just like own it and like share your wines with people is like, oh, it would be hard to convince me to do the same. I don't know. It'd be so affecting.
I think they've always been really, really good at that, at making, they're not a small winery by any stretch, and they're growing all the time, but they do make a huge effort to connect with the trade in the markets in which they sell their wine, and, and have a personal connection with these people that I think really makes a difference for us when we're trying to sell the wines. And it did for me when I was on the floor. So I always really appreciated that. So, like we were saying, great people, great wines. Luca and Elena are the current owners and operators of the estate, on a pretty important historical period for the region, and for Vietti specifically would be like the 50s and the 60s. We'll talk about that as we kind of taste through the wines, and how different sort of benchmark moments for them as a winery occurred during this period when Luca's father was the head winemaker, Alfredo Corrado. I guess we can start with the Arnase. His story is very closely linked to this grape in general in this bottle. We talked a little bit yesterday about the labels, which I think you all have on your little patches, and we should definitely take a moment to discuss them, because it's a really important part of the winery's story, I think. And it was something that always stuck with me, made the wines very memorable for me, both in the glass and then on a shelf. So the labels that you all have on your pouches, but I'll lift this up right here. So this is the 2019 Arnase. These labels and all of their labels, with the exception of their Reserva, are made by Gianni Gallo. So he passed away in 2011, Piemonte's artist. He's from Doliani, which is another winemaking region close to Barolo. That's known for Dolcetto for the most part, but he was kind of ingratiated in the local winemaking community and was just pals with a lot of the important winemakers that were just establishing themselves at the time. So when Alfredo took over the winery, he was good friends with Gianni. They hung out, they drank wine together all the time. And when Alfredo wanted to make this change with his labels, he wanted his friend to be a part of it. At the time, there was a pretty traditional approach to labeling wines in the region and in Barolo. So it was, I think he was told that maybe you want to reconsider, your wines aren't going to look serious compared to everyone else's wines, but now it's become an iconic part of the wines. And I think it's interesting how we've seen the approach of having these visually striking, colorful, beautiful labels now with, for example, in the natural wine movement, how much a label really grab someone's attention and how much people kind of align and identify with the imagery on the label before they've even had the chance to taste the wine inside. So I think in a lot of ways, that's just one element of how Alfredo was a visionary, kind of without even knowing or trying to be one. Now you'll see Gianni Gallo's artwork on the labels for Vira as well. He also does the labels for Marolo, which is an exceptional grappa producer that we see a little bit of in our market, mostly at the LCBO. They do have representation here, but if you have the chance and you're a grappa fan, you should really try these. They're pretty special.
I'm a grappa fan. I am a grappa fan. I do.
Not a grappa fan, you just haven't had good grappa.
Yeah. I don't know. Grappa is amazing.
It is.
Let's talk about wine. Let's talk about wine number one.
So we were talking about Arnese and the story of the labels and Gianni Gallo. So on this label, you can see a gentleman kind of swathed in vines, and that is supposed to be Alfredo Corrado amongst his Arnese vines. So Arnese is a pretty touchstone kind of moment or varietal for the Vietti winery. They're credited along with Bruno Giacosa for keeping the grape alive. It had basically all been mostly ripped out. There was like 3 or 4 hectares remaining in the region by the early 1960s. The name Arnese translates in Piemonte dialect to little rascal, which is a reference to the fact that it's a pain in the ass to grow, and which is probably what contributed to it being ripped out systematically over time. It is not super, super high in acidity, although it's a fresh wine and you usually see it unoaked and it's usually kind of an easy drinking, crisp wine. It doesn't have sky high acidity. So the issue that a lot of winemakers have with it is that it drops its acidity really quickly on the vine. And it has this issue with phenolic ripeness not quite being there, not quite being there, not quite being there, and then they're leaving it to hang for a couple of days, and by the time they go back, it's overripe, it's lost its acidity, and they don't have an opportunity to make a fresh wine anymore. They're now left with like flabby fruit. So that's a challenge. It's also apparently quite a delicious table grape. Birds love it. So it was a pain in the butt for them to manage pests in that way. Actually, in the early 20th century, its most prominent use in vineyards in Barolo was to be interplanted amongst Nebbiolo vines in order to encourage birds to eat the Arnese instead of the Nebbiolo grapes.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it was blended into Nebbiolo as well, because Nebbiolo and also Barbera was sometimes a blending partner. Both are very high acid grapes, so some winemakers would co-ferment with Arnese in order to just kind of round out the wines. So in the mid 50s, Alfredo committed to producing still dry Arnese, and he and Bruno Giacosa really fought hard to maintain their plantings and bottle these wines and get these wines to market and encourage people to drink them. And since then, I'd say it is, certainly in my experience on the floor and in wine sales as well, one of the most recognizable, most enjoyed white Italian grapes. I think it has changed a lot of people's perspectives from a consumer point of view, in that it's not this bony kind of anemic wine that a lot of people associate those qualities with Italian whites, certainly like Tuscan whites and that kind of thing we kind of talked about yesterday, Vernaccia and that kind of thing. This is a satisfying, round, juicy, it's like somewhat aromatic grape that's like very easy.
It's so delicious.
Mm-hmm. And there's a
Just
lot of
one
great
good one.
options in our market now, as well as the Vietti, which I think is always a really great place to start because of the history that the winery has with the grape. Jacoza's Arnase might be my favorite. It is like more opulent without oak. It is like silkier and a little richer, stunning, more of a honey kind of quality to it. Oh, if you haven't had it and you love this grape, you gotta have it.
I do love this grape. I do love it. This
But
is a really, like, as a hot tip for this wine, like how do I navigate this wine? It's a really good wine for, there are modern wine trends is away from fruity, anything that can associate wine with sweetness. And obviously this wine is dry, but it also has this herbal sort of savory vegetable component, which I think if you're in the industry or you want to recommend this wine to someone, it really appeals to their sort of fear of sweetness in wine. And I've always enjoyed pouring it and sharing it with people because I know there's this satisfaction that I know that they'll get from having a wine that they're not worried about the sweetness level. Whether that's good or bad is not sort of what we're commenting on, but especially having a white wine that has that savory component is such a nice, it's such a change from like what we usually use, words we usually use to describe wine. So it's so delicious.
yeah,
Hope everyone likes it. Yeah, I guess so.
in terms of winemaking, I guess we should talk about that. I mean, I think there's not a lot of winemaking on this wine. It's all stainless steel. There is no mallow, but there's a little bit of lees, like resting on the lees.
Yeah, you get that texture.
But you do get a little bit of that. Vines are 25 years old. This is from the Santo Stefano part of Ferrero, which is right in the center. Ferrero is kind of hard to generalize, mostly sandy soils. Certainly in this region, you're looking at a lot of sand, or in Santo Stefano, you're looking at mostly sandy. So there's an ease and an openness to the wine, even though it's 2019. I think it's pretty open knit and pretty aromatic, pretty easy to get quite a few different notes from it. It's certainly not shut down or something that would require a great deal of age. Arnase does develop quickly in my experience. It's a grape that's kind of prone to oxidization. So that's something to look out for when you're tasting it. I think if you're seeing a lot of honey on a young wine, then you should be concerned. It does kind of work itself into the wine in a really nice way over a couple of years with a well-made example, but that is something that you just want to be kind of on the lookout for with the Arnase grape in general.
And when we take this back to Piedmont and like, this is a really good example of, there is a lot of Chardonnay and Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc grown in Piedmont and some great wine.
Did we lose Nick? Nick?
Oh no.
Oh no. Okay, I think that I think I know where he was going, so I'll start talking about that. I think he looks great frozen. Hopefully he reanimates soon. But we were going to start talking about Timorasso, which is another white Italian varietal from the region, from Piedmont, that Vietti's just recently started working with. They're on their second vintage now. Rachel. Anyway, and it's like we were talking about earlier, just another example of how they are always looking to add to their lineup, to innovate, and to be, I don't know that they're necessarily always the first, but they are very open to what their peers are doing. And for a winery with such a long history in the region and such traditional roots, they are not afraid of change in any way. They're not afraid of adapting to the current moment. And I think their new ventures really represent that. So I know they're interested in Alto Piemonte for sure. I would not be surprised if we saw some wines from them from that region in the next 5 years or so. Who knows? I don't know anything for sure right now, but I know that's something that they're interested in. I think Timorasso represents their desire to expand their white portfolio, or the white part of their portfolio, although it represents, it's a very different expression than Arne, so it's complementary, I think, in a lot of ways. If you haven't had Timorasso before, there's very little of it planted. Again, I think it's about like 7 hectares total, maybe, it might be less. And Walter Massa is kind of the leader in the region, really. But I guess you should call him the torchbearer in the region for the grape. He is the reason why it's still planted and still being drank in tiny quantities today. And Vietti has always appreciated his wines and loved his wines and knows him well, and wanted to do what they could to take this grape and continue to push it to the forefront. So, I mean, I think it looks like we have a lot of trade in the chat. So I'm assuming most people watching have had Timorasso before, but if you haven't, I mean, it's often compared to, I've heard it compared to Riesling several times, which I'm like, I think kind of, I can see it. There's definitely like some apricot honey notes. There's higher levels of acidity for sure than what you would see in Arnaise. There is a textural weight to it and textural component to it that is quite unique, I feel. But it's very delicious. It's definitely also, in the way that Vietti vinifies it, a little bit more on the reductive side, something that I would say you want to lay down for a few years before you're going to get the best expression from it. Whereas the Arnaise is kind of pull the cork, ready to go. And while it'll evolve in interesting ways over like 3 or 5 years, it's not really, they're not making it with that express purpose in mind. So
yeah, when I opened the wines for the tasting, I was really excited because this is the first time I had 2019. And so I was like, oh my God, this is going really well. And again, you know, it's something that I harp on about a lot, like guilt-free opening of wine is such an important, like, skill I kind of want to give to people, because it's nice to have confidence in, hey, I want to drink a bottle of wine, nice bottle of wine. I can open this now. I don't have to open it. I don't have to cellar it. I don't have to keep it. There's no guilt associated with it. And it's, such a good wine. So excited.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like in just speaking about that, and something that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Vietti. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. Just in transitioning to wine sales and working with like younger clients who don't have massive wine cellars, you know, and they're passionate people who love collecting wines, but, you know, they have maybe a fridge or an area in their house, but they don't have this massive expansive space in which to store and age wine. So I'm definitely hearing that from a lot of clients. And that which is you know what, like an exciting movement in wine, is this sort of democratization of wine in a lot of ways that's happening in multiple ways. And that's just one of the motivating factors, I think, for this, is like, I don't necessarily want to have these like establishment cellars full of classic producers. I want like juicy things that, you know, drink well now. So it's interesting. It's definitely an ever evolving moment for wine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome back, by the way, Nick. I missed you.
I'm sorry. Thank you for keeping going. I don't know what happened. Then my internet was unstable, and I was like, I don't know how to fix that problem. So I just reloaded. Anyway, Barbera.
Yeah, exactly.
I love the most. This is a really great example of Barbera, and you know, we talk you talk about Piedmont, you talk about Nebbiolo, and you talk about Barolo and Barbaresco, which, for people who don't know, Barolo and Barbaresco are made from the Nebbiolo grape. But Barbera can tend to have this kind of cheap and easy, non-serious wine kind of reputation. And I've been more challenged by Barbera and like its capacity for complexity and breaking down those kind of ideas in my head than I ever have with Nebbiolo, and kind of why I cherish Barbera so much. In sort of, I mean, I don't sell a lot of Nebbiolo, but I will always sell a Barbera, and I will always recommend Barbera to a lot of people. But this is a really great Barbera, and I mean, is a question for you is like, if you could tell the audience, like, how does this Barbera, defy those like tropes about Barbera?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, there are delicious examples of Barbera that are more on their fruit and that are like crunchy and amazing, like everyday wines. And I love them as much as I love this example. I think we're all probably picking up a little bit of new oak on this wine, which you do see in some Barberas for sure, but it's not always the go-to move, especially in this price point. So they're making and attempting to make, and I think successfully making a more serious expression of the grape and in an entry level price point, which is always great. I think the way that the Barbera grape relates to the Vietti family and their story as well is very interesting, and sort of a central tenet of their story. Now it has a little bit more significance to Luca Corrado, current winemaker, than it did to his father or to his grandfather. It was the first wine that Luca was allowed to make when he started working with his father in the winery in the early 80s. I think quite famously, his father said to him, like, let's watch you ruin your first wine. You can make the Barbera. And I think that comment always kind of stuck with Luca. I think it was said with love, but I think it made him want to show that he can make an exceptional expression of the grape and that it has a place in the Piemonte hierarchy of fine wine and not just, table wine. And certainly I don't want to misrepresent. I mean, Vietti is not the producer that makes exceptional high-end age-worthy Barbera. Mm-hmm. But they make some of my favorite versions. They always have. When we're talking about this wine in particular, I mean, in terms of winemaking, again, there is a little bit of barrique on this. They use 3 different vessels in the élevage. So they use tonneau, what's the cask, some stainless and a little bit of barrique. I don't know what the percentage is, but it definitely can pick it up on the nose. And this is made from 3 vineyards, hence the name often seen, Tres Vignes. One of the vineyard sources that they're using for this is their La Crena vineyard, which is one of their 2 old vine sources. So this is a vineyard that they purchased in the early 90s, but the vines were planted in the 30s. So I think for me personally with Barbera, vine age is super, super impactful in terms of what you're going to get from the finished product in terms of complexity and concentration, which I think you get in this wine. And again, at the price point that it's sold at is an exceptional level of concentration and complexity. And what else should we talk about? Should we talk about Asti versus Alba?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe.
I know what that means. No, I'm kidding.
I saw it. I'm sorry if I don't get to all of these because the chat moves quickly. I don't know the story behind this label specifically. It is a Gianni Gallo label. Most of the labels and most of Gianni Gallo's artwork is focused on nature and specifically like Piedmont nature. I think quite famously, like he almost never left the region. He's like very happy there, as if you've been, like, how could you not be?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know the story behind the little face. I feel like I asked once and I don't remember the answer that I got, so I'm sorry.
I do know that on their website, they sometimes have the story of like the wine, the label, and what's in. So maybe explore the Vietti website and maybe it's clear
the
there.
website is great, like all blurred, for an Italian winery, it's a great website. I gotta say. I think all of us probably know that can be a challenge, even with some of the like bigger wineries. It's just no interest. I'm quite charmed by it most of the time. Charmed and frustrated, I guess, is a better way to describe it. But they do have a great website, lots of back vintage information. So that's a great resource if you want to get into the details of the wine. We were talking about Asti versus Alba. So, I mean, when we're talking about Barbera specifically and more general, not just Vietti, I think with Asti, you are going to see in general a higher quality product for the money. Part of that has to do with the fact that, you can plant Nebbiolo in Asti and label it Langhe Nebbiolo, but in Alba, there's a lot of crossover into areas where you could label it Barolo, and a lot of those sites have been pulled up and replaced with Nebbiolo plantings because it's what the market will pay more money for. It's a pretty easy decision for most winemakers to make. I mean, tying that back into the Vietti story and the fact that Luca is so connected to this grape, He has maintained the Scarone crew as a Barbera crew with which is kind of their house vineyard in a lot of ways. It's like directly located underneath their estate in Castiglione Filetto. Those vines date back to the 50s. And he could very easily have ripped those up a long time ago and planted Nebbiolo and make another crew. But he loves that wine. And I think the world loves that wine. It's often remarked as being the best example of Barbera that comes out of Piedmont. So, I mean, that's obviously up for interpretation. It's certainly been one of my favorites.
I mean, it has been the most captivating Barbera that I've ever had.
Yeah.
Apart from like some Barbera that I've had from the 70s, on a different level in terms of like why it was so interesting and like having a really old example of Barbera, but like bottle for bottle, it's the Scarone vineyard makes some of the best Barbera I've ever tasted in my life.
Having a well-developed, well-stored bottle of Barbera was a real paradigm shifter for me, like a very memorable moment for me. For me, it was actually a La Crena and not the Scarone, but I remember tasting one. This was only a couple of years ago, I guess, but it was from like 98 or something like that. And
oh, that's cool.
So there's definitely justification to lay down Barbera in many instances. Yeah. So I think that's something that from a consumer point of view, and I'd be interested to, as someone who champions the grape, what your experience is when you're engaging with your guests in the retail setting about it. Is there like a general, would you say like 90% of the consumers that come into Peter Pan are familiar with it, or do you find you're often?
Yeah, like there's a lot, like I always try to have the Viognier in stock, and like it's a very versatile wine, and that's not to diminish what it's capable of, but versatile is really good in an everyday setting, and this is a wine that I, advocated to be able to drink for a special occasion or every day. And there's something about the body that it can give without the sort of seriousness of the tannins. And to explain what I mean by that is that Barbera is known for having diminished tannins and not being super structured, with like that drying sensation in your mouth. So for me, Barbera is always such a great grape to have with spicy foods or things that can sometimes interact poorly with tannins in wine. And it's very rarely, unless you don't like Barbera or you don't like Italian wine, that you won't be happy with this wine. There is approachability, there is some kind of like just general deliciousness. And I was saying how I've tasted old Barbera, and it develops this umami soy sauce kind of complex like level of flavor, which I've really never seen in other older grape varietals. And that's super fun. And maybe one day I'll explore that with like, and sort of see the interactions that could have with food and things like that. But I think it's such a great grape. And like, you should always feel confident buying Barbera and Barbera d'Asti, and like, know that you can have a really easy grape, but you can also have a serious grape. So if you want to like, spend $15 on a bottle on Monday nights or Wednesday night, as the case may be, you can, but you could also go to a restaurant and spend, buy a high-end Barbera, and you're not getting ripped off. You're getting just a more complex, better expression of Barbera. So
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about Nebbiolo. Perbacco. I've been really bad. I should have posted the Barbera on the chat. But we're going to be talking about Perbacco, Longa Nebbiolo. And I was saying this yesterday, I definitely, in terms of the wines that I've always championed and stocked and tried to sell, was always number 1 and 2, like Barbera and Anise. Easy, very much my style. I honestly never sold a bottle of Perbacco before, and I very rarely sell Nebbiolo. So this has been these two wines have been a journey for me in terms of like understanding a bit more about that higher end style of Vietti wines, and so it's been super delicious. But I don't know, what does everyone think? What is everyone getting?
Yeah. So I guess I'll just fill the air while everyone's kind of giving their thoughts in the chat too. So, I mean, in terms of where this wine fits in the lineup for Vietti, they started making this wine. This was a Lucca wine and a Lucca creation, so it hasn't been traditionally a part of their lineup. It was, I believe, introduced in the late 90s, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And it was created as a way to engage a larger market with in their wines at a more affordable price point, which I think they've done very, very well. This is probably the most. I don't want to misspeak. It is a massively, massively popular wine for them across the globe. I don't know of any other Longue Nebbiolos that deliver in this price point, this level of quality, where you're getting
So crazy.
nuance of Nebbiolo. I find usually with Longue Nebbiolo in this price point, and it's not that I don't enjoy it, it's more on its fruit, and it's like a really kind of fruit forward expression, more simple expression of Nebbiolo, still very delicious, but not necessarily as nuanced as you're expecting from Nebbiolo. Whereas with this, you could blind someone on it and they'd think it was, a $70 Barolo or something like that. I think quite easily. On this
I
one.
agree, and I think it's such a good. There's something about when, and it's the same with like other grape varietals. When you have a more entry level, what seems like a more entry level wine, I'm always, especially in a restaurant or a wine shop, I'm always looking for approachability, but also like it should taste like that grape.
Yeah.
And
this
it
really,
does.
really does, and always has. I think, and for some more details on the wine, so it used to be a selection of younger vines. From there, what would have otherwise gone into the Castiglione bottling, it was just the younger barrels. But about 10 years ago, they turned it into a barrel selection. So what are the most open and approachable barrels that we have? That's what's going to become Perbacco. The name, for a long time, we talked about this yesterday. I had been told, and this is still kicking around on the internet, but this is not true, that Perbacco means for Bacchus. As in like the Roman god of drinking wine. But it's actually Piemonte slang, and it just means delicious. And it's what Luca's mother said to him when she tried a barrel sample of the wine for the first time. She thought it was Barolo. She thought it was delicious, easy to drink, and ready to go. So yeah.
I think this is a wonderful, wonderful wine. And like, you want, like, I'm not afraid to pay, 40, 40s or $50 for an entry level, for a really good Langhe Nebbiolo. Like that's kind of what you should, that's what you should be expecting to pay, so that you can get both like that canon and the structure of Nebbiolo that makes it so special, but you also be able to, again, feel free to open it straight away and not feel like you have to have aged this wine. Like leave Barolo to the aging and the cellaring, but like Perbacco, Langhe Nebbiolo, like you open it when you want and have a Nebbiolo experience without, having to overthink it and over worry about, is this going to drink well or not? Like this drinks really well, and I hope you all. I mean, hope you can sort of see that in the glass.
Yeah. I mean, really I want to start talking about vintages as well. This is the 17 that we're enjoying. We're going to have the 16 Castiglione. And in general, like if we're talking about the last 20 years in Piedmont, there are very few bad vintages. There's really just one bad vintage, and it's 2002. There are more than 5 like superb and exceptional vintages, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
When you think about that in a like fine wine, global fine wine context, that's where we're at with a region that, only 30 years ago, they were picking grapes in the snow in November. Mm-hmm. It's something to be very aware of I think, as wine professionals tasting these wines and something just to watch in the region in general. They're in a huge upswing. So even something like 17, which no one would say was like an amazing vintage in Piedmont, I think they still managed to make great wines. I mean, the thing with a producer like Vietti as well is that when you have that kind of access to fruit, you can always find a way to make good wine. But
Yeah, and like this is a really good example of like a house style, like in the same way champagne creates it. Like there is something to be said with like that champagne mentality where you want to like give expressions of vintage and like of high quality of single vineyards when you can, but there is also a like a comfortability of being able to like know what you're getting when you buy a bottle, and champagne sort of is really good at that. And like I sort of see it sort of developing in Piedmont as well,
that
that
was
you can go,
shocking that
oh,
this is.
I know Vietti Perbacco, I can drink it, I can buy it anytime, and I know exactly what I'm getting in the glass. And that's, it seems silly, it seems like a simple expectation, but it like for a lot of people it's not. And that's the beauty of this wine, is that it just
Yeah, I mean,
delivers.
you could say the same thing about Burgundy in a lot of ways as well, right? Like that was, and champagne too. I mean, when we're talking about vintage champagne, it's a little bit different, and Burgundy's a little bit more of an apt comparison. But it's like kind of was thrill of the chase of great bottles in these
Mm,
regions, 30 years ago, because great vintages were rare.
mhm.
Because you're making wine in the most marginal climates that you possibly can. You're pushing vines to like the edge of their ability to ripen grapes. And now in these very classic regions, there's this, year after year, hail and those kinds of things set aside, environmental challenges like that set aside, in terms of like the ability to actually just ripen the grapes, that's there at this point. And it's all the, now it's, you have all these options as a winemaker and the choices you want to make in the vineyard, as opposed to just praying to be able to ripen your fruit. So it's a very interesting time to re-examine, I think, a lot of these fine wine regions and their vintages specifically. Sometimes I think I think it's not just my thinking, I think it's sort of accepted. Warmer vintages and consistently warmer vintages, you're going to lose some of the signature of the site, which you'll get much more clearly in long and even vintages. That's something that that you'll see in the 16 vintages from Barolo. Specifically, if you have the opportunity to taste some different crus side by side, the site signatures are very, very clear. It's because 16 was a really long, even vintage. It was basically perfect. I think at this point they're calling it the vintage of the first 20 years of the century. So it's exciting for us to have the opportunity to move into it now.
Let's talk about wine number 4, because we're talking about higher ends, and this is, where we sort of enter into the world of fine wine and fancy and expensive wine, and rightly so. It's Barolo. I'm not kidding myself that the reason I sold so many tickets to this session isn't because of my charm, is because of the fact that we're serving Barolo. And I'm really excited to pour it, because Barolo is a wine that is full of mystique, and like it isn't, it should be, we should be able to dissemble it as much as we can to give you all like the fun and like the excitement to try it and curiosity to try it. But how's it tasting in your glass, Tony?
So, I mean, ours has been open and in a partial bottle for a couple of days. So my fruit's starting to fade a little bit.
Mm.
There's definitely barrique on this wine as well. And I'm getting that kind of right off the hop. It's young wine kind of sitting on the top of the wine.
I see
Definitely.
the elevation. I see the transition between Lungo Nebbiolo and Barolo. Like I can feel its complexity
Oh, yeah.
being elevated, but also like it's less broad. It's like a refinement of like there's a, there's like a there's like a philosophy behind it, and you have that laser focus.
Yeah, for me, the quality differential becomes much more clear on the palate than on the nose, just because, again, like we were talking about, the Longo Nebbiolo and the Probacco being selected for being kind of ready to drink and having all these like hallmarks of Nebbiolo available. So I think it's a little bit more inviting on the nose than the Castiglione is at this point. However, as soon as you sip it, its quality markers are 100% there. I think, like Rachel said, the concentration is pretty remarkable. I find the tannins to be pretty remarkable. I think that the structure of this wine, considering the power of the vintage and the legs that this wine should have, I find the tannins to be pretty well integrated into the wine. Though they're clearly there, there's a strong structure to this wine. It's got the bones to go the long road. It's still like pretty easy to drink.
Yeah.
For young Barolo. That being said, it's been open for a while.
But not for
us, yeah, exactly. So I can't
not for our friends in our audience, but I sometimes forget to drink Barolo, and I forget when I think the last time I had a serious bottle was at Christmas, and I was like, I don't often drink Barolo. I'm I drink more white wine than anything else. But I remember sitting on that couch over there and going, "Oh, this is such a good wine," and Barolo is such a treat when it's done well, and you should get pleasure from it, and you should enjoy it, and you should feel excited to open it. And like there is joy in Barolo, and it's not hype, and it's not all marketing. It's like there is something. It's someone who's tasted a lot of wines, and I bet Tony can testify to it. Like having a glass of Barolo is unique, and it is a special experience. And it doesn't have to be old, doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to feel like a Barolo, and that's definitely what I get in this glass.
Yeah. I think, if we're just going to talk about this wine specifically a little bit and a little bit of background on the Castiglione Barolo. So most of the fruit for this at this point is sourced from the Rivera Cru in Novello. So even though it's called Castiglione, it's kind of a misnomer. They have named it Castiglione because it's where the winery is located and it is their flagship Barolo. But at this point, most of the fruit is coming from Rivera. They purchased the Rivera Cru in 1995. So at that point, it's like Cogno is the only one really making serious wines in Novello, but specifically in Rivera, he is the person that really brought that cru to the forefront. And it's a large cru. It's highly elevated, about like 400 meters. And in the 90s, prior to the warming that we've seen in the region since, you had to be very specific about where you were sourcing fruit from within the cru. There were some excellent spots, but there were some spots where the grapes would not get ripe, and that is no longer the case. It's now, I think it was a great investment for them. I think what they purchased in 1994 has the value of it has more than 10 times what they paid. So a good investment for sure, and forethought again of seeing the train coming down the tracks. I don't know if you guys are tasting this and tasting soil signatures of Rivera. Be interested to hear that in the chat, just knowing that, having that information.
Trying to segue into something that is not segueable. It's it's that time of the session where we taste I taste some cheese. Yes. So I've done 2 sessions of this, and I said in the email that, hey, I'm going to taste a truffle infused cheese, because truffles and Piedmont are like hand in hand. You should always experience truffles when you're in Piedmont. But yesterday I couldn't get a truffle infused cheese from Piedmont, but I could get a truffle infused cheese from Tuscany. So I did that. I got yesterday's session, truffle infused pecorino. It was delicious. I didn't get truffle infused for tonight, but I did get a Piedmont cheese called Magengo. I said that wrong because I'm a
Love it.
dirtbag Australian, but this is, I don't know if you can see it. It's like a semi-hard cheese, hay rind soaked in beer. They say it's super rare, but it's really good.
I've never heard of it, but I would love to try it.
I
Gango.
mean,
It sounds
I
good.
promise when we ever catch up face to face, Tony, I will have some Magango for you. But
Use.
I hope everyone's got some cheese and like continue to do it because it's actually really fun. Um, we talk a lot about food and wine, and cheese has the complexity of a dish, but in like a little piece of cheese. So that's why cheese and wine always go really well together because you can have a really simple experience, but a really complex experience, which I really enjoy.
Love cheese corner.
Cheese corner. Actually, yesterday, a friend who was on the viewing the show came up with a jingle. So maybe next week we have a jingle. Who can say a little cheese corner? I mean, there's so much work
See
to
it
be
for
done. It's
us.
like, hell, why not? Like cheese corner, cheese corner. It's actually a really delicious cheese. So if you see it, take a photo of it, find it where you can. I mean, Cheese Boutique has it. They had a big pile of it. So go there or order them up. Or ask Nancy. She's in the chat. She's viewing. She owns a cheese shop in north rather than next door in the west where I am. But maybe Nancy can tell us about Magengo or what the Piedmont cheese is. Before we sort of wrap it up, it's that time of day where we give some wine away.
Oh yes, the wheel.
Yeah, but we're not going to give wine away this time. Actually, I'm going to give a ticket to next week's show, which is Australian Pinot. It's February. Oh, I forgot the date already. February 9th, Tuesday, February 9th. Australian Pinot. You've never heard of Australian Pinot, but as Tony, as someone who's been to Australia and tasted wine, like Australian Pinot is a force to be reckoned with, and it's such a great expression of Australian wine.
I will
Yeah.
be the bells on, lighting it up in the chat.
Yeah.
You
I've got the crazy wheel, the color wheel of, I don't know, doom. And I'm going to spin the wheel and we're going to see who gets to win a ticket to next week's show. Okay.
Yes, I love this.
Let's click to spin. Caitlin Ferguson, you've won a ticket. Our lovely Caitlin. And you want to know why I know who that person is? Well, Caitlin's a good friend, and she is a great wine person. So I wish one day I will remember all of your names, first and last names. But Caitlin, I will be in touch. I hope that you can come to next week's session. Co-hosted by Annie Dingwall, who works for Wine Australia and a dear friend and a really fun person. Mm-hmm. And Bronte Agostino, who is an Australian somm who is also here with me in Toronto, and I think has a really cool perspective. So, but yeah, I think this has been such a great lineup, and I'm really excited that I spent the last 2 days with you, Tony. I very rarely we see each other. We talk to each other online all the time, but like it was nice to just see your face. And one day we will do an in-person tasting or something, and you can all come and have some fun with it.
I will be there. I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Nick, for doing what you do, honestly. And Rachel, for doing what you do, unsung in the comments.
Rachel is okay. There's some new people on in these sessions. Rachel has a podcast called Ask Wine on Apple Podcasts and wherever you find a podcast. Check it out. It is the true expression of wine knowledge. This is just fun and like me kind of getting drunk with Bert and Ernie. But Rachel is like has true knowledge and is passionate about expressing that to you. So please listen to her podcast. But thank you so much for everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. It was a weird day, but we moved through it and the wines are really great. And I really hope to see you all in the future, Australian Pinot. And Tony, thank you so much. I respect you so deeply, and your knowledge and your passion and your fun and the energy you bring to wine. It's an inspiration, truly. So thank you so
Oh,
much. And maybe we'll get you back to do another session. Maybe.
I would love that.
Yeah, please.
And everyone
I would really love that.
because I think I know you all.
Yeah, we're all friends here. It's a weird
So
little,
nice. I miss people
online based community, but it's great. Everyone have a lovely night, and we'll see you all soon.
Bye,
Bye
guys.
bye.